on behalf of myself, and I'll speak for my fellow entrepreneurs. Thank you to the NASA organizers, Tom, Tim, and Kira, and of course those of you whose names I don't know yet, but I'm looking forward to meet, for having us here and letting us present. It's an absolute honor. So with that, I'll begin. My name's Herb Ryan, and I'm presenting on behalf of Bitome. At Bitome, we make a miniaturized MRI-based device for monitoring hydration status for congestive heart failure patients. And this is important for reducing healthcare expenditures and improving patient outcomes. More broadly, you can think of our technology as a vital sign monitor, a lot like a blood pressure cuff, but for measuring your hydration status. But surprisingly, measuring hydration status in an accurate, reliable way is not a technology or a method that exists today. And that's a problem because there are a number of diseases and health conditions which can actually be managed and improved by having access to that information. For instance, if anyone in the room has a geriatric parent or grandparent, you may be familiar with how hydration imbalance in the body can impact congestive heart failure or chronic kidney disease. Likewise, diabetes, surprisingly, there's a strong link between glucose levels and hydration state. Further, if you're an expecting mother, hydration state information can help you carry your unborn baby to term successfully. And if there are any men in the room that have experienced the painful reality of kidney stones, you'll know that immediately after that, your doctor told you that was in large part because you were chronically dehydrated. And finally, the reason we're here, and the reason NASA should be interested in this technology, is for the monitoring of the 43 active astronauts for long-term physiological monitoring, particularly for the problem of edema monitoring, or the buildup of water in the tissue. And this actually is also the reason our technology is so well geared to the application we're going to be talking about here on Earth, which is congestive heart failure. Congestive heart failure, or CHF, as is known in the acronym form, is a systematic disease that causes the body to have issues with regulating its fluid status. And this can result in a buildup of water, which can result in with congestion and edema of either the lungs or the abdomen. And what we are seeking to do is actually provide that information about early or pre-diagnosable edema to patients such that they can manage that disease and not have to seek hospital treatment every time they run into a problem on that front, which is currently the case. In the US, $40 billion is spent per annum on this disease, treating it, 17 billion of which is just for treatment of diagnosed patients. So these are patients that come back to the hospital again and again and again as a result of this. And for reference, this is more expensive than the total expenditure of the 5 most expensive forms of cancer. And at the heart of the problem is lack of access to accurate monitoring technology. Patients are currently diagnosed and prescribed a care management plan, which involves them stepping on a scale once a day. And that scale acts as a proxy for how much fluid has built up in their body. When they see a few pound gain over the course of 5 days to 7 days, that's a trip to the hospital, that's money spent, that's inpatient monitoring, and that's where the real cost comes in. As a result, they're prescribed a diuretic to help flush out that excess water from their body, and then they go home and the cycle repeats itself. So these patients commonly come in less than 30 days or less than 60 days. Usually there's a readmission around 90%, upwards of 100 days. At Bitome, we're seeking to break that chain with our patented technology. We want to embed our sensor with the patient such that they can have access to actionable insights about their fluid status and take the simple step of regulating that fluid status, fluid intake or salt intake. And that can help close the cycle inside the home, make them the manager of their disease, all while still involving the care provider in the loop through a telemonitoring-like scheme. As mentioned, our technology is based on magnetic resonance. This is MRI, or its parent technology, NMR. It's a 70-year-old technology invented after World War II. has changed very little in the interim, actually only getting bigger and more expensive. So it's really regulated to the well-funded research lab or clinical environment. What we bring to the table is our expertise in miniaturization and microsystem engineering, and we're taking this room-filling multi-million-dollar device and shrinking it down to a size and cost that is commensurate with individual patient monitoring. And that's a significant accomplishment. But the reason we want to do that in the first place is because the technology has a lot of advantages. One, it's safe and non-invasive, it's accurate and inexpensive, and I'll touch on each of these. Non-invasive and safe because we're literally using a magnet like on your refrigerator and a coil like what's in your cell phone. It's accurate because we're looking at the atomic nuclei on the water molecule. And that enables us to not make an overly invasive measurement that we need to take multiple points on your body. We can actually record information from your finger and use that as an overall proxy for overall body hydration. Finally, it's inexpensive. We're already 2 orders of magnitude cheaper than the closest commercial device you can buy that would do a similar measurement. And for reference, we're going to be cheaper than your cell phone in the near future. I'll just add to that, we're starting out with good data, which also helps us bring down the cost. This is in contrast to technologies that commonly start out with bad data and try to layer on sophisticated machine learning algorithms in order to read the tea leaves, so to speak. The competition out there is fairly diverse. There's other technologies and companies that try to record hydration information, but not specifically for at-home CHF monitoring. And these can largely be broken down into either inaccurate, as I was just mentioning, or expensive. Or that would also include invasive, I should say. Blood testing, for instance, requires a scheme kind of similar to glucose monitoring, pricking yourself multiple times a day. Or a more invasive version of that, which is probably the standard of care if you talk to most cardiologists, is pulmonary artery pressure monitoring. So this consists of actually inserting a catheter through your jugular and monitoring the pressure on your lungs as fluid builds up. Accurate, but not necessarily desirable, and extremely expensive. And finally, kind of the lower half there, our technology is available in the consumer realm. They're not accurate. They use typically population models in order to assess hydration state, and that's never going to be specific enough to an individual when life and death decisions are on the line. The problem of CHF isn't going away. By 2030, it's going to grow by 50% with the US population getting older. Right now, there are 6 million patients diagnosed in the US, or just shy of that. If we use some assumptions about what the historical trend has been for clinical technology going from the hospital to the home, we can come up with a serviceable addressable market of around 1 million patients. And if we think we can get 5% of that, that's around 50,000 patients. And our technology is cheap, so we actually want to adopt a pricing model similar to glucose monitoring. And these patients spend between $100 and $200. And if we use that and extrapolate out our 50,000 patients, we think we can get to 100 million revenue inside of 5 years. But it's important to note, we're not selling this to the patient looking for reimbursement. We're actually selling this to the healthcare provider. For the reason that in 2010, the Affordable Care Act put in place regulation that now makes healthcare providers a stakeholder financially in the care of these patients. So our value proposition to those care providers is our technology is cheaper than doing nothing. In addition, we also have better patient outcomes, which is good for the quality of life, and of course should be a general human idea to move towards. But CHF is really the beginning. I mentioned at the beginning there's a number of hydration imbalance related diseases. We have chronic kidney disease, as mentioned, kidney stones, diabetes, congestive heart failure, pregnancy. And these aren't to mention, of course, the consumer applications with general health and well-being, quantified athletics, and of course, corporate well-being, all of which relate back to hydration imbalance and how you feel to perform at your optimum point. I should say the technology, even stepping out a layer further, we're actually measuring, again, atomic nuclei. The technology is so powerful, we can actually measure most of the stuff on the periodic table, as long as it has something called a spin 1/2. And why that's important is because in the future, we're going to look at other things in your body, other biomarkers. That's going to expand this table even to a greater degree. Our roadmap, we were founded in 2015 and completed the HAX Accelerator in 2016. We filed our IP, which we wholly own in the US in 2016 as a priority date. Excuse me. And we've now started the pathway towards regulation with our first clinical trial scheduled this September. We're initially seeking to commercialize our technology by selling directly to care providers, as mentioned. It's important because that allows us to bypass the Medicare reimbursement process. However, long-term, we do seek to obtain that certification in order to sell our product through a different channel. The team, the founding team, I should say, is composed of myself, Jens Hoflin, and Trevor Kemp. We are researchers coming from academic and industry experience managing projects, mainly in magnetic resonance engineering and microsystem engineering, with a combined 30 years experience in those domains. And we're advised by a group of veteran technical transfer experts and business development professionals. We also have a world authority in hydration at the US Army and SAM. And what we're asking for today from NASA is primarily partnerships. We're looking for pilot studies and validation testing. And if you'd like to know a bit more about that, I'm happy to talk afterwards. We're also seeking funding exterior to NASA, of course, and that'll help us develop our product further, refine it, go through clinical trials and funded pilot studies, and expand our team to a greater degree. With that, I'll close and say that at Bitome, we believe that hydration monitoring for congestive heart failure can do the same thing that glucose monitoring has done for diabetes. If you want to learn about the future of healthcare, please come and find me after the event. My name's Herb Ryan. Thank you.
So Herb, you gave us just a little bit of a snapshot. It sounds like you're looking at a desktop device, packageable. Does the device actually measure or generate information on the congestive heart failure, or is the device really just measuring hydration?
Well, hydration is an important metric which isn't currently accurate. So when I say congestive heart failure, this is a result of congestion. So this is literally water building up in the lungs. So that is what congestive heart failure condition boils down to.
Yeah, you were talking about the potential consumer market. The consumer market
I'm sorry.
might want more than, the hydration status of the body in general is of interest for a variety of reasons. So I'm trying to get a feel for whether the device measures hydration status or whether it's already takes that data and matches it straight to a congestive heart failure discussion.
So that's what we're working towards right now, mainly because there's not good technology out there right now. So when we talk to cardiologists in particular, they don't understand the information we're providing them. So we actually have to put it in a frame of reference that they understand. For instance, many cardiologists understand water through salt. They say salt follows water. True in the case of CHF, not necessarily true in dehydration cases. But for us, we have to actually correlate our data to that in order to have a meaningful conversation with them and actually make our technology useful. For the consumer market, yes, we can start to look at just providing the hydration information as kind of a percentage of overall body hydration. You can think of the information we provide almost like glucose monitoring. You have your bounds, upper and lower, and that would be the information we would ultimately provide.
Can you say something about the size and sensitivity of your NMR?
Sure. So I can spit numbers at you, but it's going to be pretty much meaningless. It means something to me, but again, it's pretty arbitrary. We use, to give you an idea, usually the y-axis on our information is arbitrary units. So we basically have an intensity, and we track that relative to the last measurement we made. So it's not an absolute measurement. We can do that. We're not doing that. But it's actually a relative measurement. So taken over time, we can self-reference it, and that actually allows us to find that upper and lower bound. So the device right now, we have our latest prototype is around 3 inches cubed, and we're working to reduce that further. But it's meant to be a benchtop system, not wearable, specifically because most of the patients we're talking to aren't interested in wearables.
So as a technologist, you said a lot about the commercial application and what you're looking for. You know, I'm looking for how does this thing work? And you just kind of hinted at it a little bit during the presentation. You said you could detect things that have a half spin. And you also said that you could go beyond just detecting hydration, but could possibly detect other elements or other chemical signatures that you may be looking for. And I know that's not what you're after here. But does this somehow isolate hydration or water, or is it just looking for, you know, this is what's it detecting? Is it liquids? Is it what? And follow-up question, could you get to the point where you're isolating some particular salt or enzyme or something that has a particular chemical signature using the technology that you're forwarding?
I'll answer your second question first. Yes, this is what's commonly done in NMR. So you have what's called a multi-resonance probe, where you perform multi-resonance experiments and transfer polarization from one atomic nuclei to the other. For instance, we really like hydrogen because it's a high gamma nuclei, and that is great for NMR. High sensitivity, it's high frequency. We don't have to make very elaborate RF coils as opposed to like carbon-13, which is low abundance naturally, but has its purposes for, again, if you can transfer that polarization, say from hydrogen to the C13, that's a great opportunity to look at a much greater array of organics, especially in the body. That can help uniquely identify pretty much anything. That's what's commonly used in protein structure work and really any kind of metabolomic work, which is what we're doing. The first question you started out, if I remember correctly, you're going to have to remind me. Gotcha. Yeah, so we're looking at hydrogen atoms, and the hydrogen atoms specifically bound to the water molecule. They have a particular frequency, so we're doing spectroscopy, and this is separated chemically by their local electric environment on the atom. And that's how you tell the difference between ethanol, water, glucose, sucrose, down the line.
So do you anticipate any risk of operation performance and sustained performance operating in the radiation environment of space in zero-G?
That's a great question. I'm going to be perfectly honest and say I don't know. That's a very blunt answer, but my naive answer would be no. We're working with permanent magnets and radio frequency coil. You would have degradation of materials, certainly, in the radiation environment that will shift your frequency some. That much you can be pretty much sure of. However, we're already kind of solved that problem here back on Earth through kind of a redundancy or feedback loop system. And that could be something implemented in a space travel situation where you do get some frequency shifts. So the device remains accurate or at least on target throughout the duration of the trip.
Actually, that was pretty much my question. The one thing, though, on orbit is we know we get huge fluid shifts in the body, so you'd probably have to recalibrate it because of that in microgravity.
Well, so the idea is if I measure myself and you measure yourself, we're not going to be able to compare apples to apples, but so long as we're taking a measurement on you repeatedly, this is self-referencing, so we can tell this so long as we have enough density of data. So if we have that density of data, we can see the shift in a new environment. And this is actually useful for back on Earth, for instance, if you're here, high humidity, East Coast, go out skiing in Colorado, all of a sudden you tend to have problems with dehydration for exactly that reason. Your body is not attuned to that kind of change in hydration state that it has to deal with in the new environment.
I had a question real quick. Two questions. Do you have you seen any issues with any sort of interference that you may get either from the digit that's being used for analysis, whether dirty, there has to be a certain level of cleanliness that's involved to be able to read. And the other question is how rugged is this system? I come from a hazardous materials point of view, so this is something that would be great for hazardous material workers to be able to read their hydration before and coming out of a hot zone.
Yeah, you betcha. In fact, they currently use a version of NMR called one-sided NMR for exactly those applications for radiological detection, among other hazardous detection. So Yeah, great for the application. Ours is, we're not doing high field NMR spectroscopy, which requires generally a vibration table to isolate it from a nearby person walking outside the lab. It requires a superconducting magnet with a bath of liquid helium and liquid nitrogen, and generally has a variable air temperature controller. All expensive equipment that leads to highly accurate data. We're not doing that. We're doing a much more coarse version of that, largely driven by the fact that there's a lot of water in your body, and we don't need to be so accurate in order to detect that. It's a pretty big target, so to speak.
Yeah, Herb, two questions. What is your power source and power requirement for this? And second of all, do you do your data processing within the box itself, or do you transmit that somewhere else?
Yeah, great question. So we're battery powered. We are not using electric coils that would draw a large amount of power. This is, again, a permanent magnet system, so the only time we're using power is when we do our short RF pulse, which is on the order of microseconds. So that's first answer. Second question, I've already forgot it. Yeah, thank you for reminding me. We do it on board. So again, we have good quality data that we can actually perform with a fairly rudimentary computer. We have kind of a version of a microchip that acts as a Linux on a small machine, but we don't need to offload it to any kind of advanced predictive or analytics system. We do that, but we don't have to.
You mentioned it could detect different elements on a periodic table. At its core, can this technology detect a chemical compound of different substances?
Yes. Answer. Predominantly, the most common application for NMR is for drug discovery. So when you're trying to identify a site on a protein that you want to hit it with a drug, you need to know generally about nitrogen, carbon, and hydrogen. And those three generally are enough, sometimes more, are enough to get to an answer of what that site looks like. So yes, you can do pretty interesting NMR stuff. I would encourage you to read up on it. There's something called the Overhauser effect, which actually allows you to determine how far atoms are on a wrapped protein, which is pretty neat when you think about it.
I noticed today you used the word proxy for the finger. Can you reiterate the improvement that you have over, for example, scales? And then also, can you, just enlighten everybody with, like, what's the difference between that and full room scale machine?
Sure. First, to scales. When patients currently use scales, they're looking at scales as a proxy for buildup of water in their body. So when they see a delta between two weight measurements, that's indicative, if nothing else has changed, that they have now more water in their lungs or abdomen, depending on which type of heart failure you have. And that, of course, weight can be influenced by a lot of things, of course, over the scale of a week. Not to get too gross, but you have plus or minus a few pounds of fecal matter at you at any time. So these are the things that can influence that measurement. We're talking about, in our case, of actually identifying congestion or pre-diagnosable edema before it gets to the lungs. By that stage, it's already too late. You're going to need some kind of treatment. So we're detecting it much earlier before it accumulates when it's still in the bloodstream and we can actually manage it. Second question, what's the difference between our technology and a room-filling MRI? Ours is a lot cheaper and smaller. We are removing systems from that, but the fidelity of the measurement that we need to perform hydration monitoring is the same. So core technology's there.
So a question on your IP. You said you're protected. Is that the IP for the NMR, or is it something else?
It's actually a broad patent. It includes form factor, method, application, among others. So we cover, of course, NMR is a long since expired patent doing an NMR experiment. So we focus more on how we integrate that with other systems in order to make this robust measurement that's good over time in different environments and is robust against environmental conditions. These are the things that are novel about our technology that enable us to do what we do.
I believe we have time for one more.
Hey, good stuff.
Thanks.
You showed a quick estimate about revenue potential. Were you looking at the entire addressable market? You may have said this, or is that you assuming some market share?
That was 5%.
Thank you, Bitome.